Hi there. Welcome to Cats in the City, by Sith Sense. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Pearl.
Together, we would like to share with you pieces of interesting knowledge that we find.
And that could be useful to you in the future.
Pearl, what are we doing today?
We'll revise our code for the number guessing game. We'll add comments into our code.
Yes, it's generally recommended that we should write comments when coding in Pythons. The main reason is to explain the purpose of the code. Comments can help explain the purpose of the code and what it's intended to do. This can help other developers understand what you're trying to achieve with your code, and can also help you remember what you were trying to achieve if you need to come back to the code later.
If some time has passed, you may forget the purpose of your code, and going through it line by line can be time-consuming and inefficient.
Secondly, comments can help document the code and make it easier to understand. This can be especially helpful if you're working on a complex project with multiple developers, or if you're working on a project over a long period of time.
Code comments are not just helpful for yourself, they can also be invaluable for anyone else, who may need to work with or modify your code in the future. Your comments can save other developers a lot of time and frustration, trying to figure out the purpose and function of your code on their own.
And the final reason for writing comments is for debugging. Comments can also be useful for debugging purposes. If you've written a complex piece of code that's not working as intended, comments can help you isolate the problem and find a solution.
Yes, writing clear and concise comments can also help you to improve your own coding skills. By forcing yourself to explain your code in plain language, you can gain a deeper understanding of the problem you are trying to solve, and the most effective way to approach it in your code. This can ultimately make you a more effective and efficient programmer.
There's an official style guide for Python code. It's known as the PEP 8 Style Guide. PEP stands for Python Enhancement Proposal.
The PEP document is a set of guidelines that define the standards for Python language design, code formatting, and style. The purpose of PEPs is to provide a way for the Python community to propose and discuss new features, improvements, and changes to the Python language.
PEPs can cover a wide range of topics, such as adding new modules to the standard library, improving the Python language itself, or defining coding conventions and best practices.
PEPs are an important part of the Python ecosystem, as they help ensure that the language evolves in a consistent and coherent way. By following the guidelines set out in PEPs, developers can write code that is more readable, maintainable, and compatible with other Python code.
On the other hand, PEP 8 is a specific PEP that provides guidelines for the style and formatting of Python code. PEP 8 is focused on promoting consistency and readability in Python code, by providing recommendations for things like indentation, naming conventions, and code layout.
PEP 8 is one of the most widely referenced PEPs, and is considered the de facto standard for Python code style. It provides specific guidance on how to write Python code that is easy to read and maintain, which can be especially helpful for large or collaborative projects.
It is generally recommended to include a docstring at the beginning of your Python script or module, even if it is a small standalone file like a number guessing game. A docstring helps to provide documentation for the code, which can be useful for anyone who may need to use or modify the code in the future.
Docstrings are multi-line strings that can be used to provide documentation for Python modules, classes, functions, and methods.
In our number guessing game, the docstring could include information about the purpose of the game, the rules, how to play, and any other important details.
A simple number guessing game. User can choose either to be the game master or game player. Game master sets the secret number, while game player attempts to guess the secret number. The secret number can be any integer greater than or equal to 0. The upper limit for the secret number is predetermined early in the game. After each guess, the game master will provide clue to the game player, to help them refine their guess. After the player has successfully guessed the secret number, the game will ask the user whether to continue playing. The user can choose to continue playing either as the game master or as the game player. The user can also choose to end and exit the game at this point. This is the docstrings that I've written for our number guessing game. What do you think?
It's very clear and precise. It mentions the purpose and rules of this game, as well as the overall layout of the game.
Docstrings are part of our code, and so should be written in a code cell. This applies to comments as well. We'll see to it later. Notice that docstrings are written within 3 quotation marks. You can use either single or double quotation marks for this.
Next, I'll add a text cell just before the import cell. I'll write #dependency in this cell.
You are using the Markdown formatting to create a heading. Markdown formatting enhances readability. Colab supports Markdown formatting, which can help you create more visually appealing and readable sections.
Apart from comments, you can organize your code into different code sections, so that it will be easier for you and your team to work with. For example, you can use headings, bullet points, and code blocks to make your sections easier to navigate and understand.
I usually use Markdown to name the section. 1 hashtag is a level 1 heading, 2 hashtags is a level 2 heading, and so on and so forth. There are 6 levels of heading.
Here, if you clicked on this icon here, the table of contents panel will appear on the left side of your code. We'll leave the panel open for the time being. Whenever we create a new section, it'll update the table of contents. You can click on the name of the section in the table of contents to go to that particular section. This makes navigation within your code so much easier.
In that case, can I add a section just before our docstrings? I will name it as intro.
Sure, you do that by simply clicking on the text button and write #intro, using the Markdown formatting. There is no specific style guideline for breaking your code into sections in Colab, as it ultimately depends on the specific needs of your project and the preferences of your team. However, there are some general best practices that can help you organize your code more effectively.
You should use descriptive headings. Each section should have a clear and descriptive heading that summarizes what the section is about. This can help other developers quickly navigate to the relevant part of the code.
Secondly, keep sections short and focused. Try to break your code into small and focused sections that each have a clear purpose. This can make it easier to understand and modify the code later on.
Thirdly, order your sections logically. Arrange your sections in a logical order that reflects the flow of the code. For example, you may want to start with any import statements, followed by any setup code, and then the main body of the code.
Remember that we've organized our code so that all the functions appear at the beginning of the file, before the main code. Therefore, it makes sense to label the next section as functions.
Our first function was the valid string input function. Here, we should write with 2 hashtags. This means it is a level 2 heading, under the heading, functions, which is the level 1 heading.
We'll do the same for the other functions, which are the valid integer input, set upper limit, game player, and finally, game master. You can see that our table of contents is slowly being populated by different sections.
As mentioned before, if you clicked on the section in the table of contents, you will go to that particular section directly. Let's click on the valid string input function. We'll need to write some comments there.
Let's review the recommended best practices for sectioning your code. Use descriptive headings, keep sections short and focused, order your sections logically. I would like to add the fourth and final best practices, which is to use comments to explain the purpose of each section. Even if you use descriptive headings, it can still be helpful to include comments that explain the purpose of each section. This can provide more context for other developers who may not be familiar with the code base.
More specifically, you should write a docstring for each of your function. In fact, PEP 257 recommends that all modules, classes, functions, and methods should have docstrings. PEP 257 is another official document that provides guidelines for writing docstrings in Python code.
Docstring for function is written as a multi-line string that describes the purpose of the function, its arguments, and its return value. The docstring is placed immediately following the function definition, before any other code. So, for our valid string input function, we can write.
This function checks the validity of user's string input. User's string input will be formatted into lowercase. Arguments: F equals the question to ask user for input, G equals the case for input, to decide which list of valid strings to use. Returns: user's string input in lowercase format.
We'll do the same for the next two functions. These three functions are very simple and straightforward, so I won't be writing any additional comment in it. The functions have been clearly explained in the docstrings already. However, our functions like the game player and game master functions are a bit more complicated, and so will require a bit more explanation. We'll start with the docstrings for game player.
This function is called when the user chooses to play as the game player. It does not return anything. It prints out a statement when the player guessed the secret number correctly. Argument: x equals the upper limit of the secret number.
According to PEP 8, comments should be used sparingly and should focus on explaining why the code is doing something, rather than how it's doing it. That's why we won't be commenting on how the secret number was picked. Instead, we'll explain why the variable user guess was initialized to -1. Comment starts with a hashtag.
We generally do not comment on while loops, as they are often self-explanatory. However, it can be beneficial to add comments when the while loop's condition is expressed negatively. This is because negative conditions can sometimes be misunderstood, leading to confusion or errors.
We'll write a similar docstring for the game master function. Note that, for this function, we used the inline comment to explain the variables a and b. While the reason for creating and assigning values to these variables may be clear to us now, it may not be immediately apparent to other developers, or even to us when we revisit this code several months from now. According to PEP 8, inline comments should start with a hashtag character and be separated from the code by 2 spaces.
Again, we commented the while loop because its condition was expressed negatively.
The last section in our code is actually the main part of our code. We could name it simply as the main code.
Our main code is relatively self-explanatory, so we won't add any comments to it. However, if you want to practice commenting code, you can try adding comments to it. It's worth noting that PEP 8 recommends avoiding excessive or insufficient commenting, and comments should only be added when they provide useful information or context that cannot be inferred from the code itself.
What else can we do to make our game more enjoyable for our users?
There are many ways we can improve the game experience. For instance, we could implement a graphic user interface, but that's a more advanced feature. Alternatively, we could enhance the existing user interface by adding some cosmetics.
Cosmetics. What do you mean by cosmetics?
Here, we can use the print function to display a line divider at the beginning of our game. We can use the hashtag symbol, and print it 80 times to create a long line.
Ah, I see. The line divider will make it easier to distinguish between successive games, and we'll be able to see clearly where the previous game ended, and the current game begins.
We can further improve the game's appearance by adding line dividers before certain parts of the game. For example, we can print a line divider before prompting the user for input, and before other print statements in the code. These are cosmetic changes that can enhance the user's experience with the game. Feel free to experiment and find a style that you think works best. There's no right or wrong approach, it's all a matter of personal preference.
Remember our BMI code? Why don't you try to add comments into that code? It's a good exercise.
Although we added comments after finishing the code, it's generally recommended to add comments while writing the code. Commenting as you go can help you analyze and explain your code more clearly.
Personally, I find that adding comments helps me see the logical flow of the code more clearly. In future videos, we'll make it a habit to comment our code as we write it.
We've also included a link to our new, number guessing game notebook in the description below. The code has been updated with comments.
That's all from us this time. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Pearl.
Bringing you bits and pieces of interesting knowledge from cats in the city.
Thanks and see you next time.